yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you back. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm excited to welcome you back to our Civil Human Bible Study today. I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. So in that effort, I'm actually looking at my own spiritual background and looking at the teachings of Jesus specifically to try to find those teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans, regardless of our different faiths and our different lifestyles and our different politics. Today, I'm actually really excited to bring this particular study to you for if only the reason to show you the one time that Jesus, in the entire account of him, gives a criteria or a test for how to be determined as good or bad in the final judgment. This is the only time when we actually get words from the mouth of Jesus on what is considered good in his esteem and what is considered bad as far as being a human being. And I think that it will provide a bit of a surprise to many people to hear what it is that Jesus thought was particularly important when deciding what a good person looked like versus what a bad person looked like. And so let's go ahead and jump into the passage. It's Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. Starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will come and say to those on his right, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundations of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." Then he will also say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you or serve you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." There's a lot to unravel here in this particular passage, a lot that's cloaked in the conversation of an ancient culture that had a lot of agriculture and a lot of livestock that they used to live and to survive as a culture. The sheep and the goats is one of those conversations. So there's a lot going on here that a lot of people would have understood when they read this passage for the first time, or when they heard the actual words from Jesus back in the 2,000 years ago. So I want to walk through this passage to explain exactly what it is that is being said and what it means, what it meant to them, and how it can be applied to us today, there are a few particular issues in the translation of this particular Bible, because I think that they are better translated, some different words, and I'm excited to get you to that place, because for me, I get to geek out a little bit on my Greek language study, but also it actually changes a little bit of the perspective. So let's go ahead and start walking through the passage. In the beginning, right, we're introduced to Jesus being this this particular king who's returning. I just for fun called it the Return of the King. You know, for those of you who are fellow Tolkien nerds, and this is the time when Jesus is like coming back in full force. This is going to be the time when he is signifying the end of the world and everything. Essentially saying this is the end time. This is the final judgment that, you know, everybody's really holding up to and expecting in the very end, when all nations are gathered together. The word nations here is actually where we get the word ethnic. The idea is that it's everybody. Everybody that has ever existed will come before the throne of the king, as it says here in this analogy, and they will be presented and separated as sheep or goats. Now, when in the world do sheep and goats have to do with anything? Why in the world did Jesus choose this particular analogy to explain it? And why left and right? So there's a couple things that are involved here in this ancient culture. First, as far as left and right, on the right side, it was generally considered to be the clean side. And on the left side, it was generally considered to be the dirty side or the unclean side. Why is that? Because you would eat with your right hand, you would shake hands with your right hand, you would interact with people with your right hand, but your left hand was reserved to touch those things that were contaminated, to utilize the bathroom facilities. You know, there were a lot of things, of course, that were not sanitary back in the day then. It's still the same way now, but we've been able to increase sanitation a lot more. But back then, the way they dealt with human sanitation was to make sure that you never cross-contaminated your hands. And you actually can see this same cultural phenomenon in India. If you go there, you'll notice that people differentiate between what they do with their right and left hands. And it's rude to eat with your left hand, and it's rude to extend your left hand as like a greeting. So why sheep and the goats? The reason for this is that Jesus is pulling from the experience of many people who would have understood the difference between sheep and goats, because they're everywhere. Everybody may have had one or two. There were a lot of them around, sometimes in herds, sometimes just one or two per family. So everybody had an experience with them. The major difference between sheep and goats is the manner in which they have community. Sheep are inherently herd-minded. They stick together generally as a herd. They move in directions as a herd. When one of them is in danger, the herd basically circles the wagons and brings everybody in to protect it. So they're very herd-oriented. And they follow shepherds' rules generally pretty easy. So this isn't always the case, right? So in the summers when I was a kid, and you know, I was, oh man, probably in my early teens, my brother and I would go to, one of our friends had a sheep ranch, and like, it was a massive, you know, thousands of acres and thousands of sheep. And that's what he did. He produced wool. And so we would go in the summers and help him and their family, you know, take care of the sheep and do, you know, fix everything that needs to be done for animal husbandry and for taking care of livestock. So we would corral them together and move them through the chutes when we were trying to do medication or check them out, or to do branding, or to shear them. And one of the things that is interesting is that they'll generally stick together, and you have this random sheep every now and then that you got to be careful for. It's the one that has like the crazy eye when it looks at you. And I remember one particular time I was standing there pushing the herd back away from the chute because we weren't ready to put them up there. And then one crazy sheep started looking at me, and I thought, oh, I don't know what to do. And it started gunning at me. I mean, fast. And then, because of the way sheep operate, all of the sheep started gunning after me. And so I had to jump up. Thank goodness it was a high fence. So I got way up on the fence, and the thing just plowed right into the fence. So thank goodness my life was saved. It was a fascinating study into what sheep do and herd mentality. So that's sheep. Now goats, totally different animal. Goats are not a herd mentality. They're very much individualistic. Now this isn't true always, but generally speaking, goats are stubborn. They don't take leadership. They don't follow directions usually. They are often combative with other people, or excuse me, with other goats, and generally kind of a nuisance. And that's kind of the difference here. And so oftentimes in this ancient culture, they would distinguish sheep and goats and use these to converse about people who were good and who did good with human society and thought about others and were compassionate or herd-minded. And then would communicate the goats as being people who were stubborn, who were narcissistic, or only wanted to do what they wanted to do regardless of everybody else in the society. So that's what the sheep and the goats are. So why does Jesus separate them out? And what's happening here? So this is the final judgment, right? This is the end of the world as we know it. And this is Jesus's take on what's going to happen there. And then he calls them and says, here's why you are going to go with me into eternal life, or you're going to go away and be put to death. Basically, your life will just end completely. And the difference between that is just one thing. And it's surprising to me how very rare it is to hear this conversation in churches even, or in sermons, or even in books. The one determination that Jesus provides is what they did and didn't do for each other. I want to walk through a few of those. And actually, there's not that many, so I want to walk through each of them and just explain a little bit about what's being said here and what Jesus meant by it. So when he says to the sheep, he says, these are the things that you did for one another. What are those? First, somebody was hungry, they fed them. Pretty simple. The next one, somebody was thirsty. They gave them something to drink. Those are not rocket science. It's pretty self-explanatory. The next one is a little more complicated. It says, I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. This particular word is important to distinguish. It says stranger here, but that's not really what it means. It means foreigner, or somebody that doesn't belong to the nation, or doesn't belong to the people group, who's an outsider, who has come to us, and we welcome them in. And welcoming in really means to bring them together with us. In other words, to bring them alongside of us, welcome them in our house, and to basically make them feel like they are part of us, to extend what we have and who we are, to embrace them and to help them, to clothe them, to feed them, those types of things. I want to circle right back to this because this is a particularly important conversation today, I think. The next one, I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick. This word sick is really means lacking in strength. So they were, for whatever reason, unable to leave their house because they were ill. And so somebody came and visited them. This last one, I really do love. I was in prison and you visited me. I can't tell you the last time I heard a minister or a person of faith talk about serving and visiting and being a source of encouragement and support for those who are in our prison systems. It's just not really talked about these days. So Jesus says the sheep, they did this, right? They did the good things there. And then he turns to the goats and says, you know what? Depart from me, you who are cursed. This word cursed basically means who have been judged to have not been good people. And then he's going to say, and you're going to basically go off into judgment. I'll talk a little bit about what that means in just a second. First, I want to just walk through these things. He says that you didn't do any of these things for me or for the least of these. I want to make sure that we understand what is being said here. Jesus is essentially saying, everybody here, the least of these people, meaning the person who has the least status, who has the least importance, who maybe is on the social strata, is the lowest possible person. So we're talking about individuals who may live outside of society or maybe homeless individuals, whoever it is that is struggling, that's the least of that. Jesus uses the word brothers here, but it's not in the sense of brothers meaning Christians. Some Christians will do that. Some put out this message that really Jesus is only talking about helping Christians or people within our community. That's not what it means here, because Jesus uses this term to describe everybody. What I love about that particular choice in words is that he's talking about humans, human beings. Every single one of us has come from the same parent. We are all related. When we go back far enough, at some point, we are all part of the same genealogy. We are all brothers and sisters, regardless of whether we want to see it or not. I love that about the statement there. The last thing I want to talk about before I sort of wrap up and talk about how this applies to us today is a concept of judgment. He says, for those who are the goats, depart from me, you're going to go into fire, and that was prepared for the devil and his angels, is how it's translated here. Now, I suppose that could be translated to mean the devil and angels being these sort of quasi-mythological, demon-y, and Satan with the pitchfork, and these concepts that we've, in our modern times, come up with. But being that they didn't really have the concept of demons back then, in the same way that we do, this literally could be translated, I'm sending you to the fire that has been prepared for the slanderer and all of the slanderer's messengers. Angels means messenger. It's essentially the same term, just depends on the context. I want to point this out because it's important for us today to recognize that the one thing that distinguished an individual as being prepared for the eternal death is that they slandered and spoke falsely of another person. In other words, slander and false testimony or speaking ill of somebody is the worst possible thing that you can do. So I want to tie this up into today's conversation, to a human conversation. I do not have to go very far, again, to show how this is really relevant today, especially as we walk through these points. And I want to do that, just to walk through each point and talk about that in society quickly. Feeding and giving and food and shelter, these are things that are good for us to do. Providing the stranger with welcoming, that is something that we have neglected and has become a mantra of the church, unfortunately, that those who are outside of our nation, outside of our borders, don't deserve to be cared for in the same manner that we care for somebody who does belong. That's not the case here. That's not the recommendation from Jesus. His point is that every single one of us are reliant upon each other, and that we have to welcome each other in. Why? Why do we do these things? What's the reason for it as human beings? Because we may be there someday. Because we may be on that opposite side, or our friends, or our family, or may be on that other side, in need of food, in need of clothing, in need of a place to commune, to be apart. When it's all said and done, this goes right back to the virtues that Jesus talks about. The virtues that I truly believe are really human morals and virtues that cross religious lines, that cross political lines and lifestyle lines. Being being humble. These things yield and create a society that allow us to have peace and common ground and to be able to live the happiest life that we can possibly live right now, right here. As I close in this conversation, thank you for joining me for this particular conversation. I'm upset to see many in our religious communities, especially coming from a community I did, a very evangelical, a very holiness-driven community. I'm very sad to see that many ministers have decided to create rules and guidelines and virtues that aren't really echoed by Jesus. I would dare say that many churches out there are not doing any of the things that are listed here. And beyond that, as human beings, this is what a good society does for one another. Because when we don't do these things, we create hurt and resentment, and that hurt and resentment has to go somewhere. Injustice, when it is created, needs resolve. And if it isn't resolved, if we don't fix the problems, then they're going to force our hand to make sure that we do it violently. And that's why peace and common ground is so important. And why I might ask you today, just as I am, we are voting. As a civil human minister, one of my platforms is that I believe we should respect everybody's choice and need to vote for those who are going to have control over us. And in that esteem and in that effort, I would encourage you to think about these things today. Which leader is going to provide care for those who are without? Which one is going to welcome the foreigner in our lands? That's something I just want to leave you with. Thank you for joining me today. If you have comments or suggestions or ideas, reflections, please put those in the comments below. I really appreciate them. They matter to me because you're the only person in this universe that can see things the way that you can. It makes you unique and precious. And so please like my Facebook page. Would love it. So appreciate it. And if you're on YouTube, little button down here says subscribe. Please click on that button so we can stay in contact with one another, because there's some exciting things coming up that I'm really excited to bring to you. And now, until Monday, when we meet again live at noon, I want you to know that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now, I would invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day and the rest of our weekend, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.